This is homework 1, part D, and here we will be dividing the CSTR that was in part B into 20 smaller CSTRs to mimic a plug flow reactor with backmixing. We will be using Colab to simulate and plot the concentration and temperature evolution of the 20 tanks over 2 minutes, starting with a concentration of 0.5 molar and temperatures of 338.5 Kelvin in each tank, and maintaining constant inlet concentration and temperature. And then I will be explaining the concentration and temperature profiles once they are plotted. So here I have copied and pasted all of our code from homework part B with the CSTR, and some initial things that we will need to change. So first, the first thing we can add is the variable n for the number of tanks, and from the problem we know that it is 20. Next, we need to denote that our total volume now is equal to 100 liters, and that the volume of each specific reactor is going to be equal to the total volume over the number of reactors n. The next thing we need to update is our UA value. That is our overall heat transfer coefficient multiplied by the area in which heat transfer is occurring. And for this scenario, it would make most sense to divide that value by n, the number of tanks that are in series, so that it reduces the area of heat transfer. And we can change our cooling temperature to remain at 300, just so that there is insignificant amount of heat produced from the temperature gradient being provided. So getting rid of that will help ease that. All right, now that we have 20 tanks, we no longer will be able to use just one value for our CA naught and our T naught. So this will now turn into our CA naught is equal to NP dot full, and this turns this into an array, and that will be number n equal to 0.5. So what that is doing is creating n terms of an array with the value of 0.5, and that is our concentration that we want. Yep, 0.5, and our temperature 338.5. Okay. NP dot full n 338. Next, we want to create a vector of our initial conditions, and we want to do that so that we can just input one value and then later go ahead and split our array in half, and then have a list of our concentrations and then temperatures separately. So doing so, we can do our vec naught is equal to np dot r underscore, and inside our brackets we need CA naught and then T naught. Shift enter, shift enter. To our function here with our right hand side. That is still good. And we have our vec here. So here we need to update this vector such that it splits into two. So we can go, our concentration temperature is equal to NP dot split. And then C, and then we're going to split that into two. Split here. I'm going to open up my homework part C. And I'm going to come in here and grab these two equations for our first tank and then our first to the very end tank. Control C. Paste that in there. Okay. So I did that because our equation here is very similar, with the inlet concentration being subtracted by the concentration leaving the tank. And the only difference is that is being subtracted by the rate constant multiplied by the concentration, which is the rate of reaction. So the only thing we need to add in here is minus K times our CA minus K C CA C CA, this one CA CA, and that is based off of this concentration. And then our CAN CA values, we are pulling the first item from the array. And for our changing concentration for the second tank to the very end, be 1 colon, and that is declaring that we are using the second item that is in the array and then going all the way till the very end. If you do the same, 1 colon. All right. So we'll need to define our CAN still, but so it looks good for our changing concentration. Next, we want to move into our change in our temperature. So that is this expression here. I can go ahead and Control C. And then here I'm going to declare this the change in our temperature, not, and this is equal to Control V. So we have our flow rate over our volume times the temperature gradient, adding our heat of reaction multiplied by the rate of reaction. So here we'll also need to update this expression with the according syntax, but we'll also need to do a second expression for the differential of the temperature of tank 1 to N. That is equal to Control V. And then here, our Tn is going to be a function of T, similar to our concentration. And then we'll be adding our heat of reaction multiplied by the rate constant. And this will need to be from the first tank. times the concentration from the first tank divided by rho times the specific heat capacity, subtracting the heat transfer, Cp T, and then this will also be T0, representing the first item in the array. And then moving down to our second tank to N tank, our Tn is going to be from colon to -1, and that is pulling the end values. And then looking at this now, I forgot to put the first. Okay. And then for this temperature, we will use 1 colon, and that is pulling the second value from the array all the way until it reaches the parenthesis. And then we'll also do that for our K. Ca, and then our final temperature. So finished updating those expressions for our part D with 20 tanks. We can now update our return function here. So we will no longer need these expressions now. We can return a concatenated row of these four variables here, and we can do so by returning np.r underscore, and then this is splicing them all together into a 1D array. So we can do dc not dc 1 to n dt naught, and then dt 1 to n. All right. So after running, I realized that I had not created or defined these initial values for our concentration and our temperature. So I can do so by defining CAN as a function of T, and this is going to be equal to, and from our problem, we wanted to remain 1 mole. And then next we can define our Tn as a function of time. And then here we can return 5. So let's run this. So now we are at our solve IVP function, and we will need to change our initial guesses from CA naught and T naught to Vec naught. Shift enter. Local variable. For this, I'm going to try to move this on top of where we were using it. And So I think my issue is that I'm calling old variables. So let's disconnect and delete runtime. And then rerunning this. Enter, shift enter, shift enter. So I believe my actual issue is that I was not using green-kits. Sweet. We finally got our solve IVP function working correctly. We can now move down into our plotting and into our plotting for this simulation. So our t-plot is our x values that can remain the same. However, for our concentration and temperature, which is our y values, we will now need to unpack this and split it from the array using np.split. Splitting that in two, and then axis is equal to 0. We have our x and our y values. Next, fig is equal to make subplots. Rows 1, column 2. That can remain the same. But before we can move forward with adding our scatter plots, we will need to incorporate a for loop. And this is just to make sure that our code range, and this is to ensure that we are getting um, all of the individual values um, throughout our tanks accounted for, and they will be evaluated and plotted. So now we can go ahead and add these into our for loop. So now that we have these in our for loop, um, our x is equal to t-plot, our y is concentration. However, that is an array now, so we now need to update this to contain from I all the way until the end of the array. And then for our name, we're going to have this in F string, and we're going to have the concentration, and then it will be off of I. And then we will need to repeat for our temperature. We have I all the way to the end of the array. Make this an F string. Our temperature, it's all the way to I. Let's try running it, shift enter. All right, I'm gonna make our width a little bit higher. It's a little bit easier to interpret. And on this one, I think I'm gonna go. And then I'm also going to change the template here. Template is equal to plotly dark. Right. Yeah. Fig show. Just showed up. Don't need it. Shift enter. All right, so here is our respected plots. On the left here, we have our concentrations, and on the right, we have our temperatures. Okay, so with these plots here, um, we can pretty easily tell that we are reaching some steady state, and that is due to us having basically picked our initial guesses. So we have set the parameters to reach this temperature, and then once it's at that temperature, it's going to kind of mellow out, and then that's where it's starting to plateau. So if we look at just our first tanks, so our concentration is at 0.5, and then it is ramping up to 1, and then is where it is remaining and kind of like reaching. And with our temperature, our T naught, we are starting kind of around 337 and then shooting up until a little bit over 330, 338.95. And you can just see that. So as you go from CA0 all the way down to CA19, you see that there is a significant loss in our concentration, and there's also kind of similar trend over with our temperature, but with our concentration, this is due to this kind of simulating a plug flow reactor. So it's a horizontal reaction, and it's a horizontal, uh, basically like pipe, and the reaction is kind of just being pushed its way through. So it's kind of like intuitive that as you get closer and closer to the end, you are um, obtaining less and less concentration. So this plot makes sense. And with our temperature, it is the same. Um, our T19 gets really low, and then the rate of reaction ramps it all the way back up to 339. And we are given these very nice plots. All right. This is my homework one. Thank you.